Hello there, and how are we doing today? Knife's Tale here, bringing you a nice summary of a knife I've done a review on. The full review will be linked in the description if you're so inclined to look at that. It's going to be quite a bit longer. What are we looking at? We are looking at the Monterey Bay Knives Old Guard. And there's a lot to love here. There's a definite issue here, but I'm not going to be quite as hard as I was on it in the review because I think further consideration, it's a problem and it could definitely be done better, but I don't know. I think you can maybe get around it a little bit more than I was first initially thinking. But before all that, I'm not going to do full specs. That'll be the full review, but I'll just take a quick, what's the blade length? It's about a little over 3 3/8. So maybe like 3.4-ish blade lengths in inches. And 8 1/8 inches overall. What are we looking at? We're looking at M390 blade steel, which it says it right here. Thumb stud action with a decent satin, light sort of belt satin on it. Contoured titanium handles. Inset liner lock. And the knife is on washers, not bearings. So that's why it's more of a deliberate sort of tighter action, as is traditional with washers. It makes the slow roll pretty satisfying. And it gives a solidity to it. But you either like washers or you don't, or you swear by washers or whatever. That's up for you to decide. It just sort of is a different style and different feel. I'd argue that it keeps things out of the pivot more, but it doesn't completely keep the pivot from getting gunked up over time. And unlike bearings that you can basically blow out because there's axis in between the bearings that are actually touching, you have to disassemble this. So it's win some, lose some. It's also got a very good milled titanium pocket clip with good retention, but good flex, enough flex. It is minimal, it is straightforward. It is what I particularly like, knives that have that not too tall, slender, sort of long aesthetic, especially when they have a good dropping blade to the front of them. This one's got a nice drop on it, and it also widens out just a little bit right here. And it gives it, in my opinion, a very attractive aesthetic. It's simple, it's straightforward, but it's nice. And it feels great in hand. I mean, it's super comfortable. They've done a lot of really good here. And my lovely mat definitely needs to go. It has now seen several. It's actually sort of, side note, I guess, it's actually sort of fixed itself on some of them. They've actually somewhat disappeared, some of the marks and nicks and stuff like that. Maybe it's self-healing, I guess. I don't know. It's not. it's just crap, but whatever. Side tangent over. Back to the knife. That's why we're all here. We've got very minimal billboarding, though I do wish this was up here. I like when the marks are on the flat and not on the bevels of the blade. Just personal taste. And the only other real thing, there is a backspacer, the only other real thing that needs to be talked about, and the reason why this wasn't necessarily recommendable in my review, was because of the way it's all set up in and around the plunge grind. First of all, the plunge grind is pretty bad. This knife has been sharpened, it's been touched up, not full sharpened, once, and it basically came with a smile. Plunge grind hits the edge. It 100% does. It's a kind of a problem. But the real problem is the stop pin, which is right there. Why is it a problem? Because it sits right behind the edge in the closed position. Where? Right there. You can see it. It's the dark line. That's where it hits. That is really close to the edge. And I just literally saw a slight nick in the blade. Okay, so this thing does need to be sharpened. Crap. You're basically going to have to deal with this. in one way or another. You can keep sharpening up and getting a bigger and bigger smile, but of course that is also runs the risk of messing up the stone more, because when you sharpen a blade and you have the big smile, you're basically hitting the plunge grind, which is, you know, an upward angle that's now hitting into your stone. That can screw up the edges of the stone. Not ideal. That's why a lot of people like the sharpening choil. But cutting in a sharpening choil on this one is going to be very tricky because of how close the stop pin hits behind the edge. You can't touch that area. If you mess with that area, you're messing with how the blade is going to function in the closed position. You will run the risk of it over closing or just not seating into the detent properly. All kinds of issues. Now, in my initial video, I thought that was sort of, I said it was a sort of terminal kind of like full-on don't get this knife. But upon further reflection, while I think it is still a problem and it still needs to be addressed, it is actually hitting right here, which is basically flush with the full thickness of the tang. And you're not really going to want to cut in your plunge grind hitting that in the first place. That's too far back, it's too thick, it's too much steel. Normally you want to cut in the plunge grind right around here, which you can do. You just have to be a bit more careful than most knives. So it is adjustable, and it is tolerable. Still not great, but it is not as fatal as I perhaps initially thought. And that's just further reflection and looking at the placement. Maybe just kind of reconsider. There are budget variants of this knife. There are like partial inlay variants of this knife and stuff like that. It's a really nice knife. It could be a little bit thinner behind the edge, but it's not thick by any means. It just gets a little thicker fast. It just doesn't, I don't know. I guess it's probably because it's got a pretty decently thick blade stock. I think this is 140 thousandths on the blade stock, which is a little bit thicker than some knives. But it's sort of still in that, yeah, it still slices, it still cuts, it's happy medium. It sort of can do harder stuff, and lighter, slicier stuff. It's just not really geared towards either one. So it's sort of in between, which is an entire genre into itself and useful for being more universal. So that's not a bad thing. I like the feel of this knife. I've always liked this knife. That's why I got it. I liked it. It was just simple. It just spoke to me. Despite it being on washers, I can actuate this knife quite easily. I did notice before this video started that it's not quite perfectly centered anymore. It just, I guess, this is a 6-year-old knife and it's been used and manipulated a lot. It looks like it's maybe just sort of slightly come off center. It seems to be favoring the clip. I can probably readjust that, no problem. But this is a knife that I'm not going to say is fully recommendable, but it's not something that I would say you should shy away from if you don't have an issue with this or don't think there's going to be a problem with this, because you can address it in a pretty safe manner. That said, I mean, even within the Monterey Bay line, they have other knives that don't have this issue and are probably similarly styled and minimal aesthetics. So it really comes down to personal preference. But I like the old guard, and it feels like a very good knife that does go a little bit above and beyond in fit and finish and execution, even though it's so plain, for the price point where it comes in at. I mean, these things were $220-ish. I hope they're still there. I don't always or often look up the knife at a you know what? Hold on. Well, I'm going to look up the price of this knife for the summary. Just hold on. Okay, I'm back. It's been no time for you, but it's been a minute or two for me. I don't always look up knives for the summaries. I typically save that for the full review, but in this case, I just decided maybe I'm going to make a change to that. Price. This thing is really well priced. It has not moved in the price point. The base model seems to still be, if you can get them, they're out of stock right now, but if you can get them, they still seem to be right around that $200, $205 mark. And the carbon fiber inlaid variant is $220. They haven't moved since I bought this knife, actually, which is pretty good, considering it's been 6 years, or just about. So, yeah, I like what they're doing, but Monterey by Knives does also have some other interesting things that are comparable and very competitive with this. It's up to your preference, but I want to just make sure that I say that it's not quite as fatal a flaw as I necessarily initially thought. There are other knives that have a similar issue that really are fatal, where they have it sticking right up behind the edge in the middle of the plunge grind and you just can't do anything about it. This one's a little bit safer, a little bit easier to work with than that. So that's all for the update and the summary of the Monterey Bay Knives Old Guard. I'll see you guys in the next one. Thanks for watching. See ya.